just because it would have been a white person doesn't mean that that something else couldn't have come out that could have been equally as offensive. And I think that's the whole point, isn't it? That with Tourette syndrome, anything can come out in those moments of high stress, not just high stress, just tics in general. Welcome back to another episode of Finnish Podcasts. We're your hosts, Hayley and Abby. Today we're going to be discussing a moment from the most recent BAFTAs that has raised difficult questions about disability, harm, and public understanding. Our goal today is not to judge individuals, but to instead understand Tourette syndrome a little bit better and help society understand how to respond compassionately and responsibly. Abby's going to give us a little bit more detail about what has recently happened.
Yeah, so I think it's quite an important topic to talk about, actually. And I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been reading it a lot. I've been watching all sorts of videos and all sorts of things. I'm just kind of really heavily invested in this at the moment. So for anybody who doesn't know, if you're out there in the world just not keeping an eye on what the celebrities are doing, which is probably most people, the BAFTAs 2026 recently happened. And an incident occurred, which is really horrible for everyone involved. But it's opened up a wider discussion about what should we be accepting and whether there's enough education about certain disabilities. Basically, at the BAFTAs, a gentleman was there as a guest called John Davidson, and he is a man who has Tourette syndrome. And the reason why he was there at the BAFTAs is because there has been a film based on his life as someone with Tourette syndrome, and it was nominated for an award, or maybe several. I'm not too sure of the ins and outs. All I know is more of the incident that happened. But basically, he was there because they've just made a movie about Tourette syndrome and his life, and it's so important. I mean, absolutely, he should be there. However, something really unfortunate happened that, as with Tourette syndrome, people have tics and they may do things, they may say things that are out of their control. And typically it might be something that ideally they would really rather not be said. And there's no kind of meaning behind it, no truth behind it, but it's almost like, what's the worst possible thing that could happen right now? That's what happens. There was, I think, an award that was being given, I think, by Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, who are two Black men. And during their talk, John, with his Tourette's, very unfortunately shouted a racial slur. And I think what the main concern is, one, the fact that that racial slur was the tic that happened to come out, but also the fact that the BAFTAs, I don't know if they muted it or blocked it from actual live production or what the audience sees. Whenever I watched recaps or copies or scenes from this particular situation, I think it's beeped out, but I don't know if it was during the actual audience watching of the BAFTAs. So there's been a big old hoo-ha, which rightly so. It was a very horrible thing to have happened for the people who are on the stage, but also for a very large demographic of people to hear that particular racial slur being used. That's always going to be horrible and hard to hear, and they should never have to hear it. However, there's also the other side of the story, which is this man has Tourette syndrome. He had no control over his tic. He apparently left as soon as this had happened. I'm not sure entirely if he's spoken on it. I think he's given apologies, but there's, quite rightly so, uproar about it. And so I thought it would be really good for us to talk about it and maybe do some education on it to kind of help to better understand Tourette syndrome, but also to talk about whether or not we feel like this maybe might make the understanding of Tourette syndrome maybe take a step back. Because I feel like it was doing so well. The fact that they had this movie and they've been looking into it and they've been trying to, show it and give people an understanding and educate them on Tourette syndrome and how debilitating it could be to live with it. Then all of a sudden this happened and it's almost like, God, that is 10 paces backwards. This is not going to be easy to recover from. But also you don't want to downplay the effect that it's had on the people that are involved. And this is something that happens a lot. If you're insulted by somebody or hit or anything with someone with Tourette's, yes, they didn't mean it. Should you just accept it and just allow it to happen? There's a bit of a grey area there. So is this something that you've not heard before today, Hayley?
I hadn't heard of the actual incident that you're describing. And obviously it sounds like that was a really difficult situation all round. So it's something I'll probably go in and do a little bit of reading on. Tourette syndrome itself is something I am familiar with. I work with a lot of children and young people who experience tics. So I'm kind of very aware of that. And I do agree that it's a really important topic to raise awareness of. I feel that we're definitely getting better at raising awareness of disability in general and different conditions and how we can best support people. But there's always going to be a grey area with absolutely everything. And we're always going to have some people that are much more understanding than others. I think before we continue with this episode, it is really important for us to just highlight that we are two individuals who do not have Tourette syndrome, and we are not experts in this field, and we are not coming at this as experts in any shape or form. We simply wanted to join the conversation to help raise awareness, and everyone can obviously go away and do their own reading. And also, where you can, speak to people who are living with Tourette syndrome, because they are the experts of their lives and they will absolutely be able to express to you much better than we can what it is actually like to live with Tourette syndrome. I think, again, something I'd like to maybe just do as a starting point, Abby, is just give the definition of what Tourette syndrome actually is, just in case there are some people that have joined us today and absolutely have no idea what we're even talking about. You've already given some sense, haven't you, as to what it is. I am just going to be reading this from the NHS website so that I can be really clear and transparent and make sure that I'm using really, really simple language for everybody. So according to the NHS, Tourette syndrome is a condition that causes you to make sudden, repetitive sounds or movements. And these are described as tics. So if you hear us referring to tics throughout the episode, we are talking about those sudden, repetitive sounds or movements. There is no cure for Tourette syndrome, but there is treatment that can help to manage the tics that you might experience. So the main symptom of Tourette syndrome is those tics that we keep on talking about. And these can involve repetitive sounds, which are called vocal tics, or movements, which are called motor tics. And you do not choose to make the tics and you cannot control them. So some sounds that you might hear, things like whistling, sniffling, clearing your throat, making animal sounds, repeating a sound, word or phrase, and swearing. I do have to say that the swearing is more rare. Okay, so it's not as common as the other tics. And then tics that might involve movement are things like rolling your eyes or blinking, shrugging your shoulders, jerking or twitching, tensing your stomach muscles, and then jumping. And Abby, I'm pretty sure that between us, we both have either loved ones, friends, colleagues, people that we know in our lives who have tics. They might not have a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, but we both know people and we care for them very dearly.
Yeah. And I think because there's ADHD can also have some similarities where people experience vocal tics, and that's typically the sort of stuff that we'll see a lot. But even in that like a relatively mild compared to obviously Tourette syndrome, it does almost, it's still involuntary in a way. And so if you've got people, so many people with diagnosis of ADHD who have vocal tics, and most of the time people don't really bat an eyelid because maybe they're not as extreme. It still goes to show that it is relatively, they don't even realize they're doing it most of the time. So you take something like Tourette syndrome along the lines of they don't even know they're doing it, but they are fully aware that they're doing it and they really cannot help it and they cannot stop it. So it's like everything amplified by 100. It must be really hard, really fucking hard.
When we think about Tourette syndrome, research shows that when a person with Tourette syndrome is under a lot of stress, or if they're feeling really, really anxious and quite scared about something, that's when you might see an increase in tics. So I'm just thinking about the gentleman that you talked about at the very beginning, attending that type of event, in the public eye, knowing that it's being recorded and broadcasted, that to me sounds really, really scary. I mean, I find this scary where we are recording, we can stop, we can edit, we can remove things if we say something wrong. I can move my face so that you can't see me if I don't like the way that I look. And even this I find stressful. So I can imagine how stressed I would be in a big public event. Can you imagine? My anxiety would be going through the roof. And I'm somebody who does not experience tics of any sort at this time in my life. So can you imagine for somebody who does have Tourette syndrome, knows that they experience those tics, and then they are put into a position of high stress? It doesn't surprise me at all that it happened. I think it's just extremely unfortunate that the tic that did happen was of a racial nature. So it was a racial slur. And I think people have taken obviously great offense by what he said, but are perhaps ignoring the fact that it was not a choice in any shape or form.
Yeah. And actually thinking about that, so just so we're kind of seeing it from the other side as well, like why people are angry. Obviously we know why people are angry, but like there's other things as well that people are angry about, not just the particular racial slur that was used. But there's some people who, and I mean, this is mostly just the general public, and we all know they've got their own opinions, which is fair enough. But there is a lot of kind of questioning of why was he like positioned so close to a microphone, for example, if it's likely he could have these tics or something might come out. Was there anything in particular put in place to, I don't know, not to like isolate him as such, but to make sure that he wasn't in a position where actually this could do anything or cause anything or be something. So it's backwards and forwards. So there is definitely like, why should he? Why should he have to? Why should he have to be isolated because of this, condition, disability? I'm not really sure how to phrase it. Why should he be isolated? But at the same time, if people know all the tics might cause a problem because it's high stress situation, and this is probably the time that I really don't want anything to happen. If that's going to make it likely that that's going to happen, people are questioning, why was he sat so close to one of the nearest microphones, for example? Could it be that actually he didn't need to be isolated, a bit more further away from microphones? If he was to do or say or shout or act in any particular way, it might not have been picked up. So it's very like there's a lot of backwards and forwards with things, but it just made me think of that as like, well, we know people are in high stress situations and much more likely to have tics. Therefore, should that have been considered? And it's really hard to know what the right thing is to do because, like we said, you don't want to isolate somebody because that's not very human. That's not a nice, kind thing to do. But equally, could that have then just put in a little bit of a safety net if anything did happen? It's just, it's a lot of conversations going on about it at the moment, a lot.
And I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. And I think everyone's going to have their own opinions. Ultimately, it has happened. And I'm sure that the producers or editors or whoever it is that, it's obviously that's a completely different industry that I don't really understand. But I'm sure that those people in charge will be considering this for the future. And they're probably under immense pressure themselves to get things right. It's tricky, isn't it? It's similar when we think about, other conditions and other, difficulties that one might face. Is a case of, should we have to get people to suppress the way that they are? Can people be authentic? Do we have to have risk management plans in place? And it becomes really complex, doesn't it?
It does. This is why it's such a large conversation. And I think things like Tourette's, like ultimately there's education definitely in it, but people still associate Tourette's as like, people that will uncontrollably swear a lot, whereas actually it's so much more in depth than that. And I think it had started to progress. The movements were in the right place with it. Better education, better awareness, better understanding. Just, I don't know, it was doing so good. And the whole, they had this movie, I think it's called I Swear, and it had been nominated for awards, hence why he was at the BAFTAs, which absolutely he should. It was based around his life and his experience of having Tourette's. But because this incident has happened, it's overshadowed the positive success of this movie. So just to give you an example, Hayley, it was nominated for awards. I think it actually won 3 awards at the BAFTAs. I think it was Best Leading Actor for the young man who played John. I think again to him for a Rising Star Award. And then there's also, I think, Best Casting as well. So there was 3 awards that were won for this fantastic movie. However, what have people taken away from this now because of the BAFTAs? They're now going to remember the controversy of this tic that happened, this racial slur and the uproar about it, rather than recognizing, oh my God, look at this big massive milestone of this movie. And it's such a shame that it's going to take such a backward step. But I think what's really important as well to recognize, because we're always going to be big advocates for Tourette syndrome, because we are aware, we have we're mindful of the education behind it and why these tics happen ish. Kind of, obviously, like Hayley said, we're not medical professionals, but we understand at the bare minimum that they don't mean anything that they say. But let's talk about, does that take away from the people that are on the receiving end of these tics? This one is a pretty big one. That's a horrible, horrible word to have just been blurted out. And, there's other people who other celebrities, other famous people who are calling this out to kind of say, hey, it's not like a swear word was used. It's not like an insult of someone's weight or something was used. This was a very particular racial slur that happened to be yelled when two particular people were up on the stage. Like if it was two, let's say white British actors that were up on the stage, would that racial slur have been said? Probably not. So that's what people are upset about. And you don't want to take away from that.
No, but I think you can hold two truths, right? The tic was involuntary, so therefore was not intentional. There was no intent to harm the other people's feelings. So you can hold that truth whilst also holding the other truth, which is that must have been extremely horrible and distressing for the people on the receiving end. Okay, you can have both. We don't have to minimize one or the other. Both are true. It was said involuntary. It was received in a distressing way. I also imagine that for the gentleman that said it, that was probably really distressing for him as well. It wasn't, I can't imagine that he said that and then thought it was hilarious. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You know, if I see videos of him saying that thing and then laughing about it afterwards, then I'd be like, oh my goodness, that's really not okay. But if we are talking about a gentleman who's got Tourette syndrome, has said something involuntarily, obviously that's not been received very well. I totally understand that. You know, it's valid for them to feel upset by that. But if the gentleman has apologized, kind of taken accountability and said, I'm really sorry, I never intended for that to come out. I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't help it as part of my condition. And I'm really sorry for any harm that I'm caused. I don't know what else you can expect. I don't know what else people could want. You can hold those both truths. I think it's really important just to look at whether the intent was there to harm. And if it is Tourette syndrome, then the intent was probably not there.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a hard one to navigate. And I think it is exactly like you said, two things can both happen. You can be upset. You can be angry about what was said, and you are well within your rights. I mean, it was a very public platform that this happened as well. Like we said, there's also uproar about the fact that I think something editing went wrong and it was actually picked up and thrown out there. So in front of all these people, knowing it was on national TV as well, there's also something so much more heightened about it, like the humiliation of being on the receiving end of it, having to not react to it in the time as well. So trying to remain your professionalism as an actor on the stage in that moment, having to suppress any emotions. And I imagine there was quite fierce emotions for them and people in the audience for them to have to hold face and kind of be like, no, we're just going to plod on. We're going to complete what we need to do because that's what we need to do in this moment. It's also quite hard, isn't it? But I wanted to double check to see if John had actually released a statement or anything like that. And he did. I guess some people have a little bit of problem with the way that he worded it, but I don't know. I feel like this is quite appropriate. He said, you know, he's deeply mortified about it. And he says, while I will never apologize for having Tourette syndrome, I will apologize for any pain, upset and misunderstanding that it may create. And I think, I don't know, I think that's right. You should never apologize for having something that you didn't ask to have, you know? It's distressing for him. It's distressing for his loved ones and everyone around him. It will be so debilitating to his life. He shouldn't have to apologize for having that because he doesn't want it.
No, and I'm just thinking about the potential impact this is now going to have on his life going forward. Are people going to perceive him differently? And is he going to have less opportunities than he would have had if that wouldn't have happened? And I guess it reinforces that stigma, doesn't it? That this is a real issue and that we don't want to work with people that have disabilities and different conditions. And I found that really upsetting, especially because it sounds like things were going so well. And if that wouldn't have happened, there'd probably be a completely different outcome and the narrative right now would be completely different. I imagine people would be talking really positively about Tourette syndrome and how we can support people, how can we be understanding, whereas right now it seems like the focus is on something that doesn't need to be on, you know, without dismissing the real feelings of everybody. It's like, okay, can we move on from this?
Exactly. I mean, obviously we don't know John. I haven't really known anything about him prior to this, but that's on me. I just don't really keep up too much with what's going on in the world. But from people's experiences with him and people who know him, people have come forward to say he's such a lovely man. No one has a bad word to say about him. I think he's a dad. Like his family was in the audience at the time. If we are to assume he is this really lovable, kind, caring man who has tried to advocate for, you know, Tourette syndrome, and then he's had this opportunity to be almost like the face of this new campaign with the movie, for him to now potentially have his character slandered and receive hate potentially for the rest of his life. And because he's basically been thrown into the spotlight for this movie, so he can't even escape it, what happened. And
Yeah.
it breaks my heart a little bit to know that, yeah, exactly like you said, how different his life may now be. And all of
Yeah.
this, he might come to regret signing up for this movie to be done. We should be
Yeah.
like, it's such a positive thing to happen for Tourette's, and it's
Yeah.
just so devastating that this has happened.
Mm.
And I'm hoping that
Yeah.
actually what this can turn into is another example or opportunity for education to show exactly how debilitating it can be. It's proof,
Yeah.
like direct evidence of what it can be like to have Tourette's and the situations you can find yourself in. So maybe people should be turning away from this. Yes, you can be annoyed. Yes, you can be angry. Fair, absolutely fair enough. But
Yeah.
you see firsthand how distressing it can be for so many people, including the person themselves with Tourette's. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
it can all kind of, I don't know, somewhere along the line, it can turn into a positive,
Mm.
but I don't know. I just don't know if it can happen.
I suppose I am wondering whether the presenters or the actors or the audience were given any information, like were they prepped? Did they know that there was going to be a gentleman with Tourette syndrome? Also, it's that question of did they know? Should they have known? Did that person want people to know?
So yes, the BAFTA took measures to inform the audience, presenters and staff that a guest with Tourette syndrome, John Davidson, who was in attendance to celebrate the film I Swear, would be present. They did a pre-show briefing. Alan Cumming, the host, addressed it to remind them that some strong and offensive language might be heard. And apparently safety measures, so preparations included seating Davidson near an exit and leaving adjacent seats empty to mitigate risk. So actually, they were already putting special measures in for him.
Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, the impact that we're seeing, this kind of like outrage around what happened, is that coming from the audience and the people on the receiving end, or is this coming from the recording and the general public seeing it? Because actually that wasn't said to you or me. And I also recognize that I'm sat here as a white British woman who wouldn't obviously be impacted directly by what was said. But I wonder, the people that were on the receiving end of that racial slur, if they had been told in advance there is a possibility that strong and offensive language might be used, were they kind of more okay with it? Were they more understanding? And actually, it's the public's perception of what's happened? I don't know. I think it raises more questions.
I think realistically, I think, like I said, I think all of this has just been made worse by the fact that it was so public and the editing didn't happen that should have happened. You know, like how they would beep out things. I don't think that happened. And so then everybody heard it, everybody knew about it. And so it had to be addressed, and it's now become this big thing. But equally, I think that anger is still there for that particular racial slur to be used with a particular set of actors on the stage and that link. And that's why people are angry, because it's, well, that particular racial slur wouldn't have been used if it was a white person up there, for example. So it's almost like that's then evidence for some people to say, there must have been meaning behind it because they used it, I guess, in a context. This is going to sound really bad, not what I mean, but context appropriate way, in that they've used that word for two actors that you wouldn't use for two white actors. I don't know.
But I suppose it could have been it could have been a homophobic comment. It could have been a comment about somebody's weight or appearance. Like, I'm not trying to dismiss the absolute emotional impact that the racial slur had, but just because it would have been a white person doesn't mean that something else couldn't have come out that could have been equally as offensive. And I think that's the whole point, isn't it? That with Tourette syndrome, anything can come out in those moments of high stress, not just high stress, just tics in general.
I think as well, so kind of like stepping away from John in himself, I think it's been a really unfortunate period over the last few years for Tourette syndrome, because there's also another like area with Tourette's and like that being kind of in the public eye, because there's also been kind of influencers and people on social media who have actually faked having Tourette's. And I think that, and people recognizing that people can fake I mean, obviously, you can fake anything really, but people knowing that there are more and more influencers coming out and saying that they have Tourette's when actually it turns out to be fake is then also taking away from people that actually have Tourette's. So people hear something like that happened at the BAFTAs. And if there's someone that's aware that there's people who are faking having Tourette's for gain and publicity, they're going to put two and two together and go, well, obviously people can control it. Like if Tourette's is fake, everyone's faking having Tourette's, everyone is doing it for attention. They then hear something like that happen at the BAFTAs and go, well, he obviously meant it. He's using Tourette's as an excuse to be able to say what he wants or something like that. And it's so like this whole other problem with people faking having an illness or disability. And it then impacting the people that actually have the disability. And it makes you so angry, so angry.
Yeah.
Have
I
you
share that.
have you ever seen like or heard of any influencers that have faked having Tourette's?
I haven't, no, and I follow a few people that do. So you've actually now got me questioning, am I following people that are faking it? There's this one gentleman, I can never remember names because my memory is ridiculous, but I follow this one man who does a lot of work in the kitchen. And so he does a lot of cooking and he shows the impact of having Tourette syndrome whilst he's trying to cook because his tics are both the vocal ones and movement ones. And it's really interesting. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, is this real?
But
I would always assume that if somebody is telling me they have Tourette syndrome, I am absolutely going to believe them and I'm going to support them accordingly because I would never want to be a person that's like, oh, you're just faking it. But I imagine that there are people out there doing such a thing.
Well, the fact that you've just heard me say about that and knowing that that's actually a thing that's happened with like social media influencers. And already you've said, you said it yourself, you just evidenced it of saying, well, I actually follow people who have Tourette's and now I'm wondering, do they actually? And it's like already those people that you follow probably do actually have Tourette's, but already their like reliability or like their reputation has already dropped in your mind ever so slightly because now you're like, oh, are they faking it? And so if all of the population of people are thinking that same thing, no wonder something like this goes off and it's almost like a nuke just detonated and it's like, oh God, it's awful. I think one of the most popular YouTubers is somebody who has basically created their platform on the whole idea of them having Tourette's. And obviously people who do it on YouTube will tend to make more money and become quite popular. And she was called Tics and Roses. So her whole account was based on having tics. And it turns out that it was all fake. So people were actually accusing her of faking it. So again, you know what like the general public are like. They're like, they'll become detectives, they'll become Sherlock Holmes and they will scrutinize everything. And one person will like notice something, will leave a comment and then someone else is going to do it. And then everybody basically went into conspiracy theory mode of, we don't think she's actually got it. The evidence that they had was she had an alternative business page somewhere else that was like old or older that obviously, you know what the general public are like. They will sniff out everything and they found it and no tics. So nothing to suggest that she had Tourette syndrome at all. I think like, so basically there was a big uproar about it and more people were coming forward, I think, that knew her or had known her and were like, no, she doesn't have Tourette's. And so it basically ended her career. I think her like TikTok account was deleted permanently. YouTube might have been deleted, or at the very least she stopped earning money from it. There are so many people that would recognize that, hey, this person's getting popular because they're using Tourette's or they're saying they've got Tourette's. I'm going to do that too. And then you had this wave of influencers who were basically making money off of pretending to have Tourette's. And I just think that's so awful. But people do it for everything, don't they? If they think they can make money from it, or if they think they can gain popularity from it, oh my God, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. But then an incident like this then happens at the BAFTAs. And because it's got such a bad reputation, because people have been known to fake it, what are you going to do? People are going to be like, it's fake. Tourette's isn't real. So you meant what you said there. And it's such a massive backward step. Such a massive backward step. Oh, it just really frustrates me so much.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. I suppose, would it be useful if we would just very briefly talk about how to support your loved ones if they get a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, or if you meet somebody that has Tourette syndrome, how to kind of navigate that? Because I know that for a lot of people, they've maybe never met somebody with Tourette syndrome. I think people are talking about it more, but that doesn't mean that you kind of just randomly bump into people with it all the time. So obviously we both know people, and we've had either loved ones, family, friends, people that we've worked with that have got Tourette syndrome. And I feel like where I like to think that I do a pretty good job now at just being really supportive and understanding, and hopefully making people with Tourette syndrome just feel like they can be their authentic selves and not have to worry about what they do or say in front of me. I've had some really not very nice things said to me before, not racial slurs, but things like fat bitch. That's one thing that in particular has come out before. And because I know that it's not intentional, I've never been personally bothered by that, but that's because I have that understanding of Tourette syndrome. So if you were going to give somebody a piece of advice around how to support a loved one or a new person they've met or a family member or something like that who does have Tourette syndrome, what would be your top tip?
I think realistically is just making sure they are in an environment with you that doesn't escalate their stress. They don't feel like they have to be worried about what comes out, what actions their body does. And if their stress is reduced, chances are it's less likely to happen anyway. So it's just making sure that they always feel safe in their environment. Like they don't feel like something really detrimental is going to happen. Their life isn't in danger if they accidentally say something that's offensive to somebody. Taking away that pressure for them and also helping to support them. So if they find themselves in a situation where they've done something, said something, and someone's gotten quite angry about it, trying to help support, de-escalate, and always being a shared voice for them and advocating for them, and not just relying on the people themselves with Tourette's to tell people how it is. It's to also be their ally and say, no, this is the education behind it. So they don't feel so kind of alone and isolated with it. What about you?
Agree. Yeah, I agree with both of what you just said there. I think reducing environmental stress is massive. I think one of the big things for me, and I learned this quite early on, is just don't focus too much on the actual tics themselves. They will happen, and as much as possible, just try to ignore them. Just continue the conversation that you were having, continue doing the thing that you were doing. Try to not draw attention to the tics, because that is going to place more stress on the person. And the more stressed they are, the more likely the tics are to increase. So if you can just move on, ignore what was said or what was done, and just carry on. I've known people where they've had really good friendships and where the tic has been something quite funny, for example, an animal noise. And if you've got that relationship where you can both just kind of laugh it off together and you can share that joy, that's absolutely great. But I think it's really important to discuss those boundaries and the limits with the person. Obviously, I wouldn't do that with a work colleague who I don't have any relationships with. Whereas if it's a best friend that's got it, you might agree that absolutely, if I do this thing, please just laugh with me and then we'll just move on. So I think have the open conversations about it. But if in doubt, just try to ignore it.
Yeah.
And I know it can feel uncomfortable, and especially if it's the first time you've ever come across somebody that does have a tic, it can be a little bit like, whoa, what am I meant to do or say about that? Do we address that? Do we not? And that's why sometimes I'm just quite open and I'm like, do you mind if we just talk about it? If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that I'm supporting you in the right ways. And I find most people generally are quite happy to talk about these things because they want to feel heard. They want to feel understood, don't they? So yeah, that'd be my top thing.
In my role, there are plenty of people that I create advocacy cards for, and not everybody should feel like they need to have them. But some people don't want to always have an open conversation with somebody about things, especially if they're on the phone and they have to say it over and over and over again. So actually, I create advocacy cards for people for a range of conditions, anything that's basically out of their control, and they just want to raise awareness to somebody that they're having an initial interaction with. And the card might say, hello, my name is so-and-so, and I have Tourette syndrome. I may say things or do things that are not appropriate. I do not mean them. Please ignore them. Or I have aphasia and I may not be able to get my words out and I may not say the right thing. And so it's like things like that can be quite important, but equally, it's up to the individual if they feel like they want to have something like that. But I think as well, it's really important. So I'm always trying to see both sides of the coin. Yes, absolutely try and ignore tics as much as you can, especially like Hayley said, if you're quite familiar with the person, then that's going to be much easier to do. Equally, if you're spending time with someone, maybe you're not overly that familiar and actually for some reason or unfortunately, their tics happen to be quite offensive and it's repeatedly happening and you're feeling yourself getting quite angry or upset, and you still at the same time can choose to just step away from the situation. Just so, give yourself a bit of breathing room, because there is hearing things and ignoring them as much as you can. But ultimately, if somebody's going at your appearance and there's just thing after thing after thing, and you're finding yourself becoming quite distressed about it, it's okay for you to kind of say, let's catch up another day. Let's finish this meeting another day. Let's do something where I'm just going to step out for a little while. Or I'm just going to go to the toilet. You can remove yourself from the situation if it is making you feel very, very distressed. So I think it's just about everybody monitoring everything and having as much patience as possible, but not putting yourself in a situation that's really burdening for you. So then we can prevent outbursts from happening. And
I love that. Advocate for yourself as well. And I think that's why having a conversation, if it's somebody that you are going to have ongoing interactions with, just if the person is comfortable doing so, having that conversation so you can kind of explore how you're going to navigate that can be really, really helpful. But we have to remember they are humans just like us, and they are worthy just like the rest of us, and they want to have friendships, they want to have fun. The tics aren't intentional.
Exactly. And with that, it'd be a really nice way to kind of sign off with that message really kind of ringing home, I guess. We always do is we always ask Bob, our ChatGPT, a question at the end that's something related to the topic that we've discussed in the episode. And I want to ask my Bob, people with Tourette's and their tics, do they mean what they're saying or what they're doing? Is there any truth behind it or meaning? I'm hoping Bob is going to say no. And I think it would be a really nice way to end is for people to kind of have that final cemented thing of it's not meant. So I want to say, hi chat, do people with Tourette's actually mean what they say when they tic? And Bob has said, great question. And the short and final answer is no.
Boom.
People with Tourette syndrome do not mean what they say when they tic. Tics are involuntary, which mean the person isn't choosing the words or actions. Their brain is sending signals they just can't control. Sometimes tics can include words or phrases, and in a small number of cases, this can involve swearing or saying something very inappropriate. It's actually got a name called coprolalia.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But even then, it doesn't reflect the person's thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. A good way to think about it is like a sneeze or a hiccup. It happens automatically, even if the person really doesn't want it to. The most helpful thing people can do is really try not to take it personally and treat the person normally. So, yeah, I think that's how we want to end it. Bob has said it. No, they don't mean what they say. And it's just about trying as hard as you can to overlook it and have patience with them and basically live in harmony with it. Thank you, Bob. If you enjoy our episodes, please do show your support. We are available on Spotify. So if you could give us a follow and a rating, it would really help us out a lot. Equally, you can find us on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and click that little notification bell so you never miss a Finish Friday.